Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Computer Security Seminar from Purdue University. Today we have a little bit of a different approach to our talk. Last week we held the 15th annual CERIAS Research Symposium, and at that event each year we have a poster contest. We usually have around 50 or so of our projects that are led by students presented, and each year our partner companies form a panel of judges, and we give 3 awards to the top posters that the judges select. So today we have 2 of our, actually tied for first place in this year's event. Philip Ritchie all the way over to the left and Mohammed El Masheka in the middle. And they will each spend about 15 to 20 minutes talking about their poster that received this award this year. Philip?
Thank you. So my poster is actually a continuation of what I did last year. So because probably most of y'all have no idea what I did last year, let me go over really quick what it was. So what I work on in my research is information hiding. You may have heard it called steganography. It's the cryptographer's redheaded stepchild. They like to make fun of it. But I like to have fun with it. So what I've done is I've looked into how you can hide information in gameplay. So my favorite example is tic-tac-toe. Everybody knows how to play tic-tac-toe. What you may not know is that while you are playing tic-tac-toe, you have enough choice that you can send messages. In fact, as you're playing tic-tac-toe, the first player can send about 8 bits per game, so 1 character. It takes a lot of games to send a long message, but who's ever played just 1 game of tic-tac-toe? I've never played just 1 game of tic-tac-toe. So, let's see, on this poster right here, you can't see it, but maybe people online can see it. But this is the tic-tac-stego methodology, which is my cute little name for how to embed information in games. And the idea is really simple. It stems from information theory. Wherever there's choice, there's information. So in tic-tac-toe, with your first move, you have 9 choices. That means you have just more than 3 bits that you can encode with that first move. And if you're an expert tic-tac-toe player, you'll know that you can actually win or draw from every one of those positions. So they're all actually equally good. Your personal preference may be to play in the corner or on the wall or in the middle, but when you're sending a message, you don't get to make your choice. You have to send the choice the data makes. So the idea is that at every board state, you have some strategy that defines what are the possible moves you can make. Each of those moves, you will assign a bit string to. You'll say, this one is the 0, this one is the 1, this is the 0, 1, and so on. And then you'll look at your data and you'll say, which bits do I need to send, and which move does that correspond to, and you'll select that move. So if you need to send 0, 0, you'll select the move that has the label 0, 0. You'll make that move, you'll send it to your opponent, and they'll decode it, send their own message back to you. One of the cool things about this channel is that it's bidirectional, meaning that information flows both directions at the same time, and that if you don't let the game progress, the information doesn't flow. Unlike traditional steganography, where you put all of the message in one object and you ship that entire object wholesale across the network. We call her the warden. The adversary in the middle, at that point, is free to stop that message, analyze it until she's satisfied, and then ship it on to Bob. So Alice, has a lag between when Bob gets her message. Here, Wendy, the warden, can't even do her analysis until the game's already been played, at which point the message has already been sent. Decoding or extracting from the board is done basically in just reverse order. You look at the board, what were the choices Alice chose from? What were the bit strings attached to each of those moves? Which one did she pick? That's the bits she sent me. And you just do that back and forth until you're done. We use tic-tac-toe as our example because it's simple, but this works for any game where you have 2 players, or at least 2 players, perfect information and no chance moves, also called combinatorial games. So last year, I ended my poster with an analysis showing that Wendy the warden, when she's looking at games played by Alice and Bob, cannot detect when they're playing to send information and when they're playing normally, when she doesn't know how they normally play. If all she has is the rules of the game and she has to make some assumptions about, okay, maybe humans don't make stupid moves, Alice and Bob can defeat that. Okay, maybe humans always play perfectly, which is completely false, but maybe they do. They can defeat that. I showed that Alice and Bob can play perfectly and still have capacity left over. So Wendy's in the dark. She has no idea when they're sending, when they're not, and Alice and Bob are still communicating. To give Wendy the ability to distinguish between authentic human-played games and these dirty computer-generated games, we have to have access to human data. So over the last year, I've collected about 19,000 examples of tic-tac-toe gameplay. If you go to my website, you can look me up on the Purdue CS website. On my website, there's two links, one for tic-tac-toe and one for Connect 4. You can contribute to my data collection. You can help me learn how humans play these games. So of these 19,000 examples, they're each collected the same way. You're presented with a board, and it says pick the next move. That's all you have to do. All I record is what the board was, what your next move was. I have 19,000 of these. Using these examples of gameplay, I built 3 different classifiers. A rules-based classifier, which is just like, are you playing greedy? Like, if you can win, do you? If you can block, do you? Are you playing perfectly? I just set up a bunch of rules and I say, how well do you adhere to these rules? And that's what a rules-based classifier does. If you stray from my rule set too many times, I'll mark you as being, well, actually, if you stick too closely, in some cases, you're a human. If you don't stick closely enough, you're a human. It depends on the specific case. But I can learn a classifier which, after about 4 or 5 games, has nearly perfect accuracy. It means that Wendy can look at Alice and Bob's gameplay, and after watching them play 4 or 5 games of tic-tac-toe, not that many, she can reliably and accurately distinguish between when they were humans and when they were computers. Meaning, now Alice and Bob, as opposed to having unlimited capacity, they've got basically three games. That's 24 bits for each of them, if they're playing randomly, which is horribly. And that's not very much. We can do even better, actually. If you use a feature-based detector, where I defined features such as the greediness or the optimalness, any features you want to define, but the 2 I used were just greediness. How closely do you adhere to the if you can win, you do. If you can block, you do. Otherwise, you play randomly. And how optimally do you play? These 2 features split up the data into this spatial distribution of data points. So these are all, these blue down here, these are random players. If you played randomly, you're down here. If you played perfectly optimal, you're way up here in the corner. If you play perfectly greedy, that means you always win if you have the chance to, and you always block if you have the chance to. You're way over here on the side. The rest of the time, if you're a human, you're playing somewhere here in the middle. This nice separability means that I can get very high accuracy. These lines are a decision tree. 3 decisions. I check 3 things, and I've got you 100% of the time. I know if you're a human or a computer. This takes, what is this, like about 6 or 7 games. I watch you play 6 or 7 games, and I've got you 100% of the time. Finally, a probabilistic-based detector. Basically, it's a Markov chain. I look at, given a board, how likely is it that a human makes a certain move? How likely is it that the human goes in the corner on the first move of tic-tac-toe? How likely is it in the middle? And that kind of stuff. I do this for all of the board states. And I can compute a likelihood of, given an example, how likely was it to have been generated by a human? And how likely was it to have been generated by a computer? Take the ratio of those, and it's like probability of human to probability of computer. If it's more than 1, if it's more likely to be a computer, to be a human, I classify it as clean. If it's more likely to be a computer, it's dirty. This works pretty well in some cases. Some cases it works not so well. Some cases it works extremely well. I can't read this, but I think this is in the case of an optimal computer. I can't tell, but in just 2 games, it's above 95%. I can watch you play 2 games, and Wendy will know if you're a human or a computer in just 2 games. If you're playing tic-tac-toe well, that's 10 moves for X and 8 moves for O. It's not very many moves. It's certainly not very many bits. And so what we've learned from this is first, humans do not play optimally, not even close. They play this kind of mixture between optimal and random, where most of the time, in tic-tac-toe at least, you're able to pick an optimal move. The rest of the time, you're not. You make a mistake. You don't just play non-optimally, you play stupidly, about 30% of the time. You don't even play greedy. Not all the time do you win when you have the chance or block when you have the chance. Sometimes you miss it completely. This is something to do with the human psychology of you had a plan in mind, and the computer, whoever you're playing against, did something you weren't expecting, and you didn't see what it meant, and so you missed it. You got, there's a word called forked. You got forked. So they made a move, and now they can win no matter what you do. Data collection matters. We collected data in 2 different ways. One of them was sequentially. We collected data from the human saw the beginning of the board and every step thereafter. They played the game with the computer back and forth. And the other way was non-sequentially, where you were given a random board, you picked the next best move. Random board, next best move. There's a difference in detection accuracy between these 2 kinds of data collection. The sequential, which is more natural, is more accurate for detection. It better characterizes the trajectory, the momentum humans have when they play games. However, it fails to capture some of the quirks of human gameplay, or it captures them, but it can't differentiate them from just human gameplay or just normal. I don't know if we're going for that. But when you're given a board randomly, you analyze it like it's a chess piece or something, like it's a chess game. You look at every possibility. You're not going to miss anything. So actually, it's the non-sequential that misses the quirkiness. And then, like I said, the warden can very accurately distinguish between human gameplay and computer gameplay. The rules-based works the best if the warden happens to know which agents Alice and Bob are using to hide. If she doesn't know this, then she has to use the feature-based, which is still pretty accurate. We abide by Kirchhoff's rule, which says the enemy knows the system. So the warden knows exactly how Alice and Bob are doing this. There's nothing hidden to her. The only thing she doesn't know is the random number generator seed, if there is one, and potentially which agents they're using. Those things can be secret, but everything else about the method, Wendy knows all of it. And finally, the results suggest improvements that we can make for Alice and Bob. So for example, I mentioned that humans play about 70% optimal. So if I made an agent that played optimal 70% of the time, and the other 30% purposefully played badly, there's little gray dots right on top of the red human dots. They're inseparable. It is not possible at that point for Wendy using this method to separate those 2 styles of gameplay. So that gives the advantage back to Alice and Bob. The steganography game is one going back and forth. You make an advance for Alice and Bob, they get better, become undetectable. Wendy figures out how to defeat that. When Alice and Bob see this poster, they say, oh, okay, 70% optimal, that's the way to defeat her, and it goes back and forth. So this is mainly done using tic-tac-toe. We're moving forward with Tect4. I'm working on chess right now. I've had a lot of fun with this. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah. Go ahead. Any questions for Philip?
Does your work build on the idea of iterative game theory at all?
Iterative game theory? Not likely. And the reason for that is twofold. First, I don't know what iterative game theory is exactly. And 2, humans aren't capable of playing game theoretically. Game theory requires two things. You need to be able to act rationally, which humans don't do, and you need to be able to correctly estimate probability distributions, which humans can't do. So this work comes at it from more of a cognitive psychology perspective of, well, what does human behavior look like, and how can I use that to differentiate between two different sources of data? If you use game theory, you have to assume the human is playing rationally and sticking to a strategy that has some distribution on moves. And humans can do that not very often. So
Part of the reason I ask is I've read that in game theory tournaments that when you're allowed to enter multiple bots, people would enter bots, and then when they would play each other, would establish a handshake of
yes,
initial moves.
yes,
And
there's
that would
a
cheat off that.
yes, there's a classic example. This team, I don't know, it was a couple years ago, about 10 years ago, they entered a Connect 4 tournament with several bots, and they used what's called foxes and hens. And so they had one agent, which was the fox, and a bunch of other agents were the hens. And at the beginning of the game, they did a handshake, an authentication, so that when a fox played a hen, they knew, I'm the fox, you lose to me. When a hen played anybody else, it played well enough to, win or lose about 50% of the time. But because it always lost to the fox was guaranteed to win against all the hens, which was enough to give it first place in the tournament. After the tournament, they wrote the paper and said, we used collusion and we subverted your tournament. We're sorry, but look at this cool thing we did. So yeah, that's definitely possible.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you everyone for at least bearing with us with the glitch that we had in the system. So today, my poster also won as a tie in the first place with Philip. And in the poster, we discussed the use of negative information and deception and information and protecting of computerized systems. And this is a work that I'm doing with Professor Gene Spafford here at Purdue. So in security, usually we always play that story of a mole, which comes in two chapters. The first chapter, we have a security officer, or someone is really frustrated that whenever they see someone trying to poke their system as a mole trying to come out, they take these security tools that I depict here as a hammer, and they hit the mole really hard in its head. So what happens is every time the mole shows up, they get hit really hard. And every time that small mole learns something about the system, learns something about how fast do you hit with your security tools, how hard your security tools are, what kind of holes that you're paying attention more, and they can measure every time and learn something about you. And eventually something like this would happen, that you would have a painful attack that comes from some place that you're not paying attention to, and that vulnerability that you never thought of that hit you so hard, your tools failed, and you are in a painful status with forensics analysis, all that kind of stuff. So this kind of more or less articulated the status quo that we have in security. So we thought, okay, security cannot be achieved with a single silver bullet solution. The latest target breach that we saw, they had the state-of-the-art FireEye firewall and equipment has been installed. It didn't help them much because they were playing that security tool and that whack-a-mole game with the attackers. They poke, they respond. They poke, they respond. And sometimes this response is not well planned. It's not usually in the best shape they want it to be. So in our work, what we do, we present a holistic model and categorization of different security mechanisms that fit within a very nice Venn diagram that I'll be showing in the next slide, that shows anyone who is in security or responsible for securing an organization see that holistic picture. And the motivation behind that, we wanted to see where does the use of deception, the use of decoys, the use of more of the sense of what is called offensive mechanisms in security fits within the overall picture of security defenses and security tools. The second thing we did in our project is we took that categorization and we used it and mapped it against the cyber kill chain model. As you all know, the cyber kill chain model is a model developed by Lockheed Martin that says for an attack to be successful, it needs to go through a specific number of stages and all the way progressively continuing and moving from one stage to another until they act on their targets and achieve their targeted reach. And then finally, we took that deception and the use of deception and negative information, and we gave a number of examples and discussions and how can this significantly enhance the current security status in many organizations. How can we take it further? How can we use it to help us in defending our organizations? So this is the Venn diagram that I alluded to earlier. That takes all the security tools that we had and grouped them in 4 distinct categories. And you can see in the top there, we have the denial and isolation category. And that we have so many tools. We have VPNs, we have NATs, we have role-based access controls, we have IDS, IPS, firewalls. All these fits within that category that you want to deny unauthorized access to your system and isolate your system from any other or the surrounding environment that you don't trust. And in that category, we want to achieve 2 main goals. The first one is we want to prevent these unauthorized access to that information. The second thing that we want to achieve is hide the existence or the nature of some of the properties or components that we have in our system. For example, I give a NAT, for example, that we use at the network gateway. It hides the internal IP addresses from being exposed to anywhere outside, such that the NAT will have one centralized IP to send a IP request anywhere. Then the response comes to this centralized IP that then forwarded internally. And then we move on to the second group, which is the idea of when an attack happens. Of course, we cannot achieve 100% of isolation and denial, so we want to degrade and obfuscate the data, the systems that we have. And usually in this category, we want to achieve 4 main goals. We want to slow the attackers down. We want to make the recovery of the data so hard. Just to give an example, we store the passwords in our systems in a hashed format. And the reason is if someone gets access to it, they don't simply get access to the plain username and password. They need to do some cracking, which is slowing them down. And this is part of the security tools that we use and we employ it within organizations. And then we want to obfuscate either the nature or the value or the existence of the data that we have. To give an example, we use the tools like k-anonymity to obfuscate, for example, the location of a data set that we have, such that if we want to send it to someone or make it public, it doesn't really reveal the real locations of the data sets that we have. And finally, we want to create some noise. And this is, we see it, for example, IPsec has data flow confidentiality where it randomly appends some noise to the packets that goes in and out, because we don't want someone to do some traffic analysis and figure out what kind of communication that we're having and what is the size and what is the how frequent that we do it. So we have a tool that does that for us. And then in the third category, we have the deception-based mechanisms. And usually we want to achieve 3 main goals in this category. We want to lead the attackers astray such that we can feed them false information, we can fool them, we can lie to them, we can put some decoys, some beaconing mechanisms. And this leads me to the second one, which we want to add these decoys that will signal some alarms if someone got in our systems without us knowing about their attempt or knowing they're already in. And the third one, we want to increase the risk for the adversary when they attack or attempt to breach our system, and increase the doubt when they get a response from our system. If they don't really have a certainty in whether the list of passwords and usernames and hash passwords, is it the real one or is it another one that we fakely created and put in our system, and they get it and it will signal an alarm if they crack it and use it to log in, we will know by that they use the fake username and passwords that we had in our system. So this is the third category in our defenses that we have. The final one, which is not used a lot, because of course for political and ethical ramifications of the use of such mechanisms, is we want to attribute the attackers. We want to know who they are. We want to also make them feel that the attack doesn't come cost-free. It's not just you attack and then simply that's it. We want to put some and add some risk in their risk analysis and add some cost in their risk analysis methodologies, that they will know, if I get caught, there are some ways that are implemented to actively try to identify who is exactly targeting our systems. Then we took these categories and we said, okay, that looks interesting. Let's see how can we use these in all different scales within our systems. So we had in this plot, categories go from the smallest granularity from a data item level all the way up to an enterprise level. And what we said, we took and we focused more on deception. We said what we can do by employing deception-based mechanisms and deceptive measures at the data level. And we gave an example of what is called the endless files, which is files, if you do a simple ls command, the file will look so small. But when you start downloading this file size will turns out to be of a giga, if not a terabyte size, and it will exhaust your network, it will exhaust your disk space, and you're just waiting for that file to finish, and it's continuously downloading some gibberish into your system. And then we went up at the different data scales until we went up to the enterprise level, by giving an example of how fake sites can help us if we employ some deceptive mechanisms in them. And we gave also a discussion of every scale within these scales that we have. And then as the last part of discussing the categories, we show the Lockheed Martin kill chain, which is start from a reconnaissance stage, then moving to the delivery of the weapon or the attack that you're going to use, exploiting the vulnerability, then establishing command and control and operation. Then you would laterally move from one place to another until you find your target, act on this target, exfiltrate the data out, and then you will achieve your goal of the attack. And we saw at every level there is a tool that we can use from each one of these categories. There's a couple of gaps that you can see which articulate the need that these gaps show that there is a huge need in these places. There is no way, there isn't a lot of work that deals with, for example, command and control on the attribution and counter operation. There might be something out there, however, it was not shouting at us in terms of the use by the organizations and the spread of their use. And then more specifically, we focused in the purple area of the use of deception. And we gave a number of examples. How can you, for example, use at the reconnaissance stage some fake ports that if someone tries to do a port scanning, you will be alerted, and then moving all the way down to the last level of staging and exfiltration, which is putting some honey tokens and the example that I gave of the list of the hash usernames and hash passwords and usernames. Also, one of the unique characteristics of using deception in the kill chain model is the main purpose. When Lockheed Martin identified the kill chain, they said the goal is that we want to break the chain as soon as possible. Reconnaissance is the first step. Staging is the last one, because the early that we do it, we can remediate the damage much easier. The infiltration the attacker has in our system is way less than if they went all the way to establishing command and control. So one additional thing that deception and negative information and deception-based mechanisms give us, it's not just breaking the chain, it's also giving us the ability to direct the chain to our particular advantage. So if I detect at the reconnaissance state that someone using a port that is I put there for just to catch if someone's scanning, I can then later on take it, direct them to a honeypot or more of a fake system and see, let them delve deeper in the cyber kill chain and attribute them more, learn more about them instead of just simply just breaking the chain and tell them, hey, I detected you, try to use a different method. And then finally, deception has been used very successfully in the offensive side. We saw like the famous book by Kevin Mitnick that he used social engineering to attack so many systems. And the social engineering is the root of social engineering is the use of some deceptive mechanisms and lying to some people to achieve your goal. Also, phishing, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgeries, all of these are on the top list of the most widespread attacks. And as a cornerstone of these attacks, we see that they use deception. So for example, in phishing, they deceive you first to click on the link, then they put a website that deceives you by making it look like a legitimate looking website, then take your credentials. So all of these have been so successful, have been so hard to defend against, and which sparks a lot of interest in me and Professor Spafford to look more deeply in that and see how can we take these properties and apply them on more of a defensive measures. And we give more details in the paper on some examples of the use of deception and how can we use that for our advantages. Thank you for your time, and this is what the poster is all about. I would happy to take any questions if you have some. Go ahead.
Could you go back to the Venn diagram of the defensive strategies, please?
There we go.
Thank you. I noticed that, and this may or may not have been explicit when you were developing this Venn diagram, but they almost seem to move from low cost in implementation to high cost in implementation. Like for instance, attribution, very high cost, but encryption, technically low cost at this point. Was that, I think it would be interesting to see that as an additional dimension captured alongside the enterprise to data objects hierarchy as well, but was that an explicit consideration in making this?
It was not, to answer your question, it was not. We saw some of the signs that things go in terms of cost, also in terms, it goes that way from up to down, also in terms of progression of the attack. However, we saw some anomalies that sometimes things are in the bottom that are like very cheap. For example, if you go to the endless files on the deception, they're very cheap to do. It's much cheaper than installing a firewall. However, as you said, we noticed that kind of that feature of this diagram, but we didn't delve deeper into it or restructure the diagram to take that into account, but it would be an interesting consideration as a follow-up, absolutely.
I think it would actually be very beneficial to point out the part where that not all of those strategies do follow that scaling up model, because I think there's a general consensus that the deeper you go into the kill chain, the harder it is to get them back out, or the harder it is to defend against them.
Absolutely, totally agree with you.
Thank you.
Totally agree with you. Thanks. Any other questions?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's another aspect of deception, which is the semantical aspect of information, right? When the attacker attacks us, he wants to get some our information, and we can purposely give him false information or half-truth information, right? And I have a feeling, but again, this is just my thing, that you are you're not talking about this aspect. Is it relevant for your research or?
It is absolutely relevant, and this is where the point we talk about these examples in a little bit more details in the poster and more explicitly in the paper. Feeding false information is one of the examples that what you can feed them. There are some other things that you can feed them, for example, as what is called a booby trap software, which is basically a software that if they execute, it will cause some damage at their own side. And this is you're absolutely right. There has been actually a recent paper that shows that if you actively feed some of the, and they call it honey files, which is you feed them a file, and basically if they open that file, it will send a signal to tell you exactly the location of that place, or when was it open, or something like that, or the IP address that is local to that network. So you're absolutely right. It's just I didn't put everything there in the poster, but it's a major part of the work that I'm currently doing. Any other questions?
Were you inspired, sorry,
Yeah.
were you inspired somehow by the works of Professor Rowe?
Yes, absolutely. He did a lot of work in that area, and he had a number of papers, especially in the military environment, and the use of deception and sensitive networks and that kind of stuff. And he was one of the first, and most influential people in that area. But absolutely. Other questions? All right. Thank you. Great.
Well, thank you to Philip and Mohammed. If anyone else would like to see the posters at that were shown at the symposium, you can go to the CERIAS website, click on Annual Symposium, and then go look at any of the years there and the collection of posters presented. Thank you very much.